The first tremor of a true spiritual awakening does not arrive with light. It arrives with loss, not the kind we can explain or even mourn, but the quiet vanishing of everything we thought we were. The collapse is internal, invisible to the outside world at first, but to the one experiencing it, it feels like an earthquake of the soul. Our identities are carefully constructed over time, not consciously, but through repetition, expectation, reward. As children, we observe what earns love and what earns silence. We learn to become acceptable, agreeable, impressive. We become what is needed, not necessarily what is true. And over the years, this performance solidifies. The smiles at the right moments, the achievements on display, the ideas we call our own, though they were never deeply examined. All of it forms a structure, a mask we come to believe is who we are, but it is not. And one day, without warning, that mask begins to crack. For some, it happens through tragedy, a death, a failure, a betrayal, but for others, it comes through the unbearable pressure of sameness, the weight of a life that looks right but feels wrong. This is what happened to Rachel. On paper, she had everything: a thriving law career, 2 children who adored her, a marriage that functioned, if not passionately, then at least publicly. Every box checked, every milestone met. But something within her, something ancient, voiceless yet undeniable, began to stir. At first it was a whisper, then a restlessness. Then, suddenly, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, her body refused to go on. Sitting at her desk, staring at a stack of neatly prepared documents, she broke. Not dramatically, not with violence, just stopped. No accident, no confrontation, no tragedy. Only the soft explosion of an inner truth rising to the surface. This life isn't mine. That single thought became a rupture. The identity she had worked so hard to build no longer made sense. The values she stood for felt borrowed. The woman in the mirror looked like a stranger. And in that moment, she awakened, not in bliss, but in confusion, in grief. Because what no one tells you is that awakening begins with a death, not of the body, but of the ego's illusion. That identity you clung to, the one everyone praised you for, it was a scaffolding, and when it falls, you fall with it. You are left in a space between stories, no longer who you were, and not yet who you are becoming. Rachel's awakening cost her everything the world said should matter. Within 6 months, she left her job. Her marriage could not withstand the shift. Her closest friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the intensity of her transformation. They said she was selfish, unstable, dramatic. But she wasn't any of those things. She was simply no longer asleep. She had glimpsed the great lie, that fulfillment comes from performing a script well. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. But what makes this stage so dangerous is the silence that follows. When the mask is gone and nothing replaces it immediately, there is only void. This void terrifies people. So what do most do? They try to rebuild the mask. They look for the next job, the next partner, the next identity to attach themselves to, anything to feel solid again, anything to quiet the storm of uncertainty. But that storm is not punishment. It is purification. And if you turn away too soon, you miss the very point of the collapse. You see, we are conditioned to survive by fitting in. To belong, we adapt, we comply, we dim or exaggerate parts of ourselves, and we begin to think the mask is our face. So when the spiritual process begins to remove the mask, it feels like an act of violence. But it is not violence, it is liberation. Still, most cannot endure the unmasking. Why? Because the ego, the constructed self, is it knows how to survive. It whispers, you're losing everything. It tells you that you're ungrateful, that you're broken, that you are betraying your responsibilities. And in some ways, you are. But you are also doing something much more courageous. You are betraying the lie. That is a different kind of integrity, one few are taught to honor. This is why so few make it through this first stage of awakening. Because the silence where the false self once lived is not empty. It is full of discomfort, full of questions that have no answers, full of a truth that doesn't come in words. And in a world that values clarity, speed, and control, being in that space is unbearable. People will ask you what's wrong, why you're changing, why you're making everyone uncomfortable. They will want you to explain yourself, but awakening cannot be explained. It is not logical. It is not linear. It is not a problem to be fixed. It is a call to dissolve and to trust that something wiser will take shape from the ashes. But most people want certainty, not freedom. They want to feel good, not whole. And wholeness requires confrontation. Confrontation with every role you played to be loved, every opinion you defended just to feel smart, every smile you gave when you wanted to cry, every yes you said when your body screamed no. Letting go of those things doesn't just feel vulnerable, it feels like annihilation. But something deeper is at work, something ancient, a force that is not interested in comfort, but in truth. And truth is fire. If you walk through it, you will burn, but you will also rise, not with more answers, but with real presence, with a face that is yours and no one else's, with a voice that does not tremble when it speaks the truth, with a soul no longer shackled by performance. But that path begins with collapse. And to the part of you still attached to the mask, that collapse feels fatal. So most people run. They go back to sleep. They call it a phase. They numb it with noise. They rebuild the persona, this time more carefully, and they survive. But they do not live. Because to live, to truly live, you must first let the false self die. And most cannot bear that kind of death. Because they do not know that what follows is not ending, but becoming. Rising from the surface is stripped when the polite version of ourselves is peeled away like a costume we've forgotten we were wearing. Something begins to stir in the depths. At first, it is faint. A discomfort, a tension in the chest, a sudden, inexplicable sadness. But soon, the floor beneath your carefully managed life begins to crack open, and from that fissure, the shadow rises. The shadow is not a thing we can see in the mirror. It doesn't wear a face or a name. It is everything within us we refuse to see, not because we are bad, but because we were frightened. From a young age, we are taught what is good, what is acceptable, what is normal, and anything else is pushed away, exiled into the basement of the psyche. Anger, when it is punished, goes underground. Vulnerability, when it is mocked, turns to armor. Desires that don't fit into the mold of our culture are hidden beneath layers of shame. All of it, the fear, the grief, the lust, the envy, the resentment, is buried, and the deeper we push it, the darker it becomes. But what we do not understand is that these parts never die. They wait, silently, patiently, until the day we are cracked open enough that they can rise. This is why a spiritual awakening is often accompanied not by light, but by darkness, a suffocating kind of darkness that cannot be rationalized or avoided, one that arrives without warning. You might wake up one day, no longer able to feel joy in the things that once pleased you. You might find yourself consumed by a sadness so deep you fear you'll never reach the bottom of it. You might rage without reason or cry without knowing why. You are not broken. You are encountering your shadow, and that encounter is sacred, but terrifying. A study done in 2018 by the University of Oxford examined individuals undergoing what they called intense spiritual transformations. Many of them displayed symptoms that in the medical world would be labeled as depression, anxiety, or dissociation. Some even feared they were losing their minds. But the researchers discovered something curious. Over time, the majority of these individuals did not regress. they evolved. They reported a deeper sense of peace, purpose, and clarity than they had ever known before. Their temporary descent was not a breakdown, it was a breakthrough, one that required them to walk through the underworld of their own psyche. But the modern world does not understand the underworld. We are taught to fear darkness, to avoid pain, to sanitize and suppress anything that doesn't conform to the image of success. So when the shadow rises, most people panic. They look for quick solutions. They numb with distraction, scrolling, drinking, working, performing, or worse, they pathologize the experience. They assume something is wrong with them. And so they seek to silence what is actually asking to be heard. But the shadow does not disappear when ignored. It festers. It grows in secrecy, in shame, in denial, and eventually it demands expression, often in destructive ways. The angry outburst that seems to come from nowhere, the anxiety that no amount of reassurance can calm, the addiction that pulls you in despite knowing it's killing you. These are not random flaws. These are shadow eruptions, symptoms of the parts of yourself you've never allowed into the light. To survive a spiritual awakening means not only witnessing your shadow, but welcoming it. This is no small task, because to truly face your shadow, you must let go of the comforting story that you are entirely good, or in control, or immune to the chaos of the human condition. You must look into the mirror and say, yes, that too is me. The jealousy, the bitterness, the selfishness, the craving, the rage, all of it. But within those very things lies your power, because beneath every dark impulse is a wound, and within every wound is a hidden gift. Your rage, it may hide a sense of justice that has long been ignored. Your grief, it may hold the depth of love you've never been able to fully express. Your fear, it may be the key to a strength that has never had a chance to be tested. None of this can be accessed until the shadow is owned. Not with shame, but with compassion. There is a story of a man who spent years meditating in search of enlightenment. He fasted, prayed, purified. He thought he was close to liberation. But one night, in a dream, he was visited by a serpent that lived beneath his house. It spoke to him, "Until you acknowledge me, you will never be free." He woke in terror, thinking he had been cursed, but a wise elder told him, "That serpent is your power. It is what you cast out to become holy. But there is no wholeness without her." And so he went inward, not upward. He faced the serpent, and only then did he begin to heal. We each carry a serpent, and most of us run from it all our lives. This is why so few people survive their spiritual awakening, because when the shadow comes, it does not knock politely. It invades. It turns the lights off. It rips down the curtains. It demands that you meet the parts of yourself you swore never to show the world. And unless you have the courage to do so, you will try to destroy what is actually trying to redeem you. Repressed shadows do not die. They return, stronger, more chaotic, more dangerous. If not faced, they take control. They act out through your choices, your relationships, your failures. They pull you into cycles you swore you'd never repeat, until you either own your shadow or it owns you. But if you can stay, if you can breathe through the storm and say, "I see you," something miraculous happens. The shadow begins to soften. It becomes not a monster, but a messenger. It shows you what you are made of. It teaches you to love the unlovable in yourself and therefore in others. It breaks the illusion of perfection and replaces it with the strength of authenticity. You become less polished, but more real, less certain, but more whole. And through that wholeness, a deeper kind of light is born. Not the blinding light of denial, but the steady flame of truth, the kind that survives the night. Most will not get this far. They will run, they will retreat to comfort, they will rebuild the mask and pretend nothing happened. But for those who stay, the shadow does not destroy, it transforms. When a person truly awakens, the transformation is not gentle. It is not about becoming better in ways others will always applaud. It is about becoming different, not slightly, but utterly, in ways that challenge the very fabric of the relationships, traditions, and structures that once defined your life. And so it happens quietly at first, and then with unmistakable force. You begin to feel the invisible distance forming between yourself and the world you once called home. It is not that you turn away in pride or anger, it is that something deep within you shifts. A reorientation of values, a reawakening of forgotten truths, and in that shift, you stop fitting in. What once felt natural begins to feel artificial. The conversations that once filled your days now sound hollow. The roles you played so convincingly, the dutiful son, the loyal employee, the agreeable friend, no longer feel like yours, and you realize something profound. You have changed, and your world no longer recognizes you. This is not rejection in the ordinary sense. It is existential. Friends begin to drift not always because they no longer care, but because they no longer understand. They feel the change in you, and it unsettles them. Not because you've become less, but because in some quiet way, you've become more than the version of you they could control, define, or predict. Families, especially close-knit or traditional ones, often interpret this transformation as betrayal. Communities, bound by unspoken agreements of sameness, begin to treat your difference as a threat. The tribe, after all, survives on agreement, shared myths, common values, predictable behavior. And when one among them dares to step beyond the invisible boundary, the tribe feels endangered. So they defend themselves. They push back, they ridicule, they exile. The tribe fears the lone wolf. Ideal's story is not unique, though it is rarely spoken of openly. Raised in a deeply conservative household, he was a model of expectation, successful, polished, respected. At 35, a spontaneous, mystical experience shattered his certainty. It did not make him better in the way people understand better. It made him different. He began speaking about presence, stillness, and the illusions of material success. He stopped drinking. He gave away the luxury car that once defined his status. He started meditating, not for performance, but for survival. And those closest to him did not celebrate this evolution. His father told him he had lost his mind. His wife left him. His colleagues mocked him, not because he became dangerous, but because he became other. And here lies the paradox of awakening. As you begin to feel more connected to your soul, you often feel more disconnected from society, because humans are wired to belong. It is one of the oldest truths in our collective memory. To be cast out was, once upon a time, to die. Our nervous systems are still shaped by this memory. So when we begin to awaken and the people around us start pulling away, it feels like death. Not physical, but emotional. And that loneliness, subtle, creeping, suffocating, can break even the strongest hearts. We imagine, often romantically, that the path of awakening is filled with light, but before light comes the void. Before community comes isolation. Before recognition comes misunderstanding. The awakened are not celebrated in their time. They are often mocked. Their passion mistaken for madness. Their clarity for arrogance. Their refusal to play roles for irresponsibility. It is easy to speak of transformation when it is distant or symbolic. It is far harder when you are sitting alone in your apartment, wondering if you made a terrible mistake by walking away from everything that once gave your life shape. And yet, this loneliness has its purpose. Separation is not punishment. It is passage. It is the necessary dismantling of false bonds to make space for real ones. Most people do not survive this stage because they panic. The absence of affirmation feels like failure. The lack of companionship feels like evidence they are on the wrong path. And so, in desperation, they go back to the old job, the old relationship, the old beliefs. They wear the mask again because it is easier to be accepted than it is to be free. But the cost of returning is high, because once the soul has tasted freedom, it will never again be silent. It will whisper, even in your most comfortable moments, "This is not who you are." And that whisper will grow, and it will either lead you forward again or it will eat you from the inside out. If you can endure the loneliness, however, if you can let the silence shape you rather than shatter you, something begins to shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, you begin to attract new connections. Not many, not quickly, but they come. People who see you, not because you are useful or familiar, but because you are real. People who recognize your eyes, not because they've known you before, but because they too have seen the dark and chosen not to look away. These are not replacements for the ones you've lost. They are companions for the journey ahead. They do not require you to shrink. They do not ask for the old you to return. And their presence is not just comfort, it is confirmation. But this only happens after the separation, after the long night, after the silence. The path of awakening will almost always lead you away from the herd. Not because the herd is wrong, but because your truth is no longer negotiable. You cannot stay where you are not seen. You cannot pretend to believe what no longer resonates. You cannot love others fully until you first loved yourself honestly. And so you walk, sometimes crawling, sometimes doubting, sometimes weeping with the weight of it all, but you walk. And you remember, even in the loneliest hour, that this is not the end. It is the beginning of belonging in a new way. Belonging not based on approval, but on authenticity. Not on sameness, but on soul. And that is a rare thing, precious, but it asks everything of you. Most people do not survive this part of awakening because they do not realize what the loneliness is doing. It is breaking the chains. It is cleansing the need to perform. It is stripping away the belief that love must be earned by conformity. In the end, it is not about being alone. It is about being alone long enough to remember who you are, so that when you finally meet those who see you, it is you they see. And when that happens, the world no longer feels foreign, not because it changes, but because you have. To be spiritually awake is not to bask in eternal peace or dwell in a state of bliss untouched by the world. It is, more truthfully, to feel the unbearable weight of seeing things as they are. It is to wake up and discover that the world you once accepted without question, the systems, the values, the roles, the explanations, was built on illusion. It is to walk through the same streets and see the pain in the eyes of strangers, the desperation in the smiles of neighbors, the false confidence in those who once intimidated you. It is to realize that suffering is not the exception. It is everywhere, and worse, much of it is preventable, but no one wants to admit their role in it. To awaken spiritually is not to escape reality. It is to finally collide with it, without the cushion of denial. You begin to see how much of your life was unconsciously inherited. The beliefs you defended were never really yours. The habits you cultivated were survival mechanisms. The goals you chased were shadows of someone else's dream. Awakening dissolves the illusion of innocence, not in the sense of blame, but in the sense of responsibility. You begin to see that every word, every silence, every action, every avoidance has power, and you are the one who holds it. This realization does not liberate immediately. It humbles, it crushes, because when you awaken, you lose the luxury of blaming others. You cannot pin your misery on your parents or your boss or your ex or society or fate, not because they didn't harm you, but because you now know that the only person who can heal you is you. Responsibility in this sense is not moral pressure. It is the soul's call to integrity. It is the recognition that no one is coming to save you and no one needs to, because the part of you that is eternal has never been damaged. but you have to return to it. You have to dig through all the lies you told yourself. To avoid feeling pain, you have to confront the parts of your past you've tried to bury. You have to own the places where you betrayed your own truth, not to punish yourself, but to reclaim your power. And that reclamation is terrifying, because control, even when it is oppressive, is familiar. Victimhood, even when it is painful, can feel safe. To say, I choose, is to stand naked in a world that offers no guarantees. To say, I am responsible, is to accept the weight of your own destiny, no longer tossed by the winds of circumstance, but directed by the compass of your soul. This is why so many do not survive the final stage of spiritual awakening, because the freedom that comes with it demands too much. It demands honesty, brutal honesty. It demands that you stop manipulating outcomes, stop hiding behind false humility, stop pretending that it demands that you feel everything you've numbed for decades. The grief, the rage, the loneliness, the joy, all of it. Awakening removes your excuses. You cannot unsee what you've seen. You cannot pretend you're unaware. The moment you know better, your silence becomes a lie. The moment you recognize your patterns, your repetition becomes a choice. And choice, though it sounds like freedom, is often paralyzing, because it means you're no longer able to hide behind faith. You carry the burden of awareness. You walk into rooms and feel the energy shift. You hear the words people aren't saying. You sense the lies, the pretenses, the distractions. You see your old self reflected in others. The one who smiled to avoid conflict, who pursued success to feel worthy, who said yes to everything just to feel safe, and you weep for them. But you also know you can't go back. You watch others chase what you used to chase: approval, applause, escape. You remember what it was like to believe that achievement could fill the void, that relationships would save you, that money would finally bring peace. And though you no longer believe the lie, it still hurts to watch others live it, because you understand how convincing it is. You understand why they'd rather be asleep. And you too, in your weakest moments, wish you could return. You wish you could unknow what you know, to eat the bread of illusion again and believe its nourishment. But you can't. Not really, because once the eye of the soul opens, it never fully closes again. You can distract yourself, you can numb it temporarily, you can try to re-enter the matrix of roles and routines, but the soul is patient and relentless. It will wait, it will whisper, it will stir in your belly when you lie to yourself. It will tighten your throat when you speak against your truth. It will drain your joy when you abandon your path. And eventually it will bring you to your knees again, not to shame you, but to remind you, you know who you are. That knowing is not always blissful. Sometimes it is a burden, because once you awaken, you're not just aware of your own pain, you're aware of the world's. You walk through a society where people are screaming internally, smiling externally, and pretending everything is fine. You see through the news, the ads, the small talk. You realize how much we normalize insanity, chasing what doesn't matter, avoiding what does, sacrificing depth for comfort. You want to shout, there is more than this, but you also know most aren't ready to hear it. And so, the awakened often carry a quiet grief, not because they are lost, but because they remember what it was like to be. They walk with a silent resolve, a tenderness for the broken, and a deep reverence for truth. They stop trying to save others. They start embodying what they've found. And in doing so, they become a living contradiction, deeply compassionate, yet boundaried, fiercely present, yet detached, rooted in responsibility, yet surrendered to the unknown. Most people do not survive this stage of awakening because it strips away every crutch, every comfort, every false identity. It leaves you raw, unmasked, accountable, but it also leaves you real. And real is not safe, but it is sacred.